Hello everyone, my name is Hongyu Chen. I'm a brand new doctoral student at the University of Sydney. My supervisors are Professor David Evans and Dr. Betty Liu. Today I'm going to talk about secondary school teacher attitudes towards inclusive education in Australia and China. Okay, a quick agenda. So in the introduction, I want to talk about backgrounds and why we have looked into the study, the methodology, key findings, and also a brief conclusion. So before we start, just imagine there is a place where children of all abilities learn, play, and grow together. They are talking, discussing, singing, and dancing in a comfortable, home-like, supportive learning environment. Diversity and differences of all students are accepted, incorporated, and celebrated. That is what we do every day. We are trying to think about how to make this become a reality. So what is inclusive education? Inclusive education enables teachers to provide equal educational opportunities for all students and eliminate their learning barriers. To develop inclusive education, teachers need to adopt an inclusive pedagogical framework. An example of the inclusive pedagogical framework in our study is a universal design for learning. So in our present study, we surveyed secondary school teachers in Australia and China. Notice that none of the previous studies focused on Australia and China. This research study filled this gap through an analysis of teacher attitudes in the context of Australia and China. So our primary research question is, how do the attitudes towards inclusive education differ between secondary teachers in Australia and China? Then how do the attitudes towards the UDL inclusive pedagogical framework differ between secondary teachers in Australia and China? Also, the association between teacher attitudes and their background variables have also been examined in this study. So the third question is, how are the attitudes of secondary teachers towards inclusive education related to gender, years of teaching experience, and country? So why is this important? The more we know, the more we can do to develop a teacher capacity to be inclusive of all students and embed the value of diversity in the culture of educational institutions. So now we move on to the methodology section. In this cross-sectional study, a total of 120 Australian and 143 Chinese secondary school teachers completed the online survey. So that is a 60% response rate. A snowball sampling has been utilized to invite secondary school teachers from both Nanjing, China, and Sydney, Australia metropolitan areas. To collect the data, there are three sections. One is teachers' demographic information, and also teacher attitudes towards inclusive education, and also teacher attitudes towards the UDL framework. The corresponding instruments are a demographic survey, a modified version of the teacher's attitudes towards inclusive education scale, and also a self-designed UDL framework scale. In section 1, demographic questions such as gender, years of teaching experience, and the location of teaching countries have been asked for generalization purposes. Then, a modified version of the teacher's attitudes towards inclusive education scale have been utilized to measure teacher attitudes towards inclusive education by encompassing 4 content areas, which include inclusion as a value, learning environment, impacts on teaching, the right of students with disabilities. Then a self-designed UDL framework scale has been utilized to measure teacher attitudes towards the UDL framework in the context of inclusive education, focusing on what teachers can do for their students in mainstream classrooms. Both inferential and descriptive data analysis have been conducted on SPSS software. Independent samples t-tests have been utilized to measure the differences of teacher attitudes between Australia and China. Multiple regressions have been utilized to verify the association between teacher attitudes and their background variables. So the main results of our study indicated that Australian secondary school teachers have more positive attitudes towards inclusive education, including the UDL framework, than those of their Chinese colleges. One of the possible explanations for the different teacher attitudes between the two countries was the differences in educational settings. In Australia, majority of students attend regular schools. Although there are still segregated settings, 85% of children aged 5 to 18 with disabilities receive their education in mainstream classrooms in Australia. However, educational setting is more segregated in China since there is a still expansion of special schools in regions of China. In 2017, 50% of students with disabilities did not receive their education in mainstream classrooms. The next possible explanation is a cultural historical background. After revealing the relevant documents about inclusive education, the core values of equity, respect, and diversity have been recognized in both countries. However, we noted that the objective of Chinese traditional education is cultivating ethics for the management of federal government. Although China is shifting from traditional ethics education to increase educational opportunities for all students, its educational culture is still highly competitive and exam-oriented. Compared to Australian teachers, Chinese teachers usually have greater pressure to develop students' academic outcome, which also impacts their attitudes towards inclusive education. Another one is teacher-parent collaboration. Both Chinese and Australian teacher standards emphasize that teachers should ensure effectively communicate and engage with parents for the development of all students. In Australia, family school partnership framework was introduced by Australian government in 2008 to support parent engagement and student learning and well-being. The teacher-parent collaboration has been recognized as national priority in Alice Springs Education Declaration. Our survey results suggested that 10% favor Chinese teachers recognized the importance of teacher-parent collaboration than Australian teachers. It may be due to that Chinese teachers usually valuing teacher authority highly and having fewer families involved in student learning, even for students with disabilities. Another possible explanation is teacher preparation. It has been suggested that teachers who undertaken some preparation in the field of inclusive education will generally hold more positive attitudes than those who had not undertaken any form of preparation. Our survey results suggested that 4 times fewer Chinese teachers completed a unit of study in special and inclusive education than Australian teachers. Chinese teachers were less likely to attend professional learning workshops or seminars about inclusive education. In Australia, completing a unit of study in special and inclusive education is compulsory in New South Wales. And also the UDL framework, the inclusive pedagogical framework, is a key learning concept in the unit of study. So that is four possible explanations for the different teacher attitudes between the two countries. So in conclusion, understanding teacher attitudes through the lens of inclusive pedagogical framework is important to support all students, including students with disabilities. So in-service teachers should learn how to strengthen their existing instructions to create an inclusive pedagogical learning environment. For pre-service teachers, they should learn more skills and knowledge about how to implement inclusive pedagogical framework to be better prepared for educating students with disabilities in their future career. Also, for school administrators, they may need to provide more professional training opportunities and more supporting resources for the development of inclusive education. Thank you. That's my presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me.